Good evening. Try that again. Good evening, all. Hope you're having a good Friday here. Very gloomy picture outside and kind of makes you want to curl up with a good Stephen King book. This is up at 8,000, 9,000 feet. This is kind of like an elevated stratocumulus layer. We would probably consider this altocumulus or maybe altostratus. I don't think there's a good cloud designation for that. But this is being caused by a little bit of isentropic lift over a cold dome that we have here. And one thing I want to do is start out with the big picture here. This shows the progression of the jet stream, and that we're kind of under a northwesterly flow here in the U.S. We have a ridge west trough east pattern. So there's the big long wave trough, and the big long wave ridge is out in the Pacific. And embedded in that, you can see smaller scale systems working through the flow. So a bunch of different scales that we can see here. There might even be a shortwave through here, and certainly could have a shortwave ridge moving through the flow right there. All in all, what we're seeing here, probably a Pacific surface system right around there, up in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. And the rule of thumb that we use to find the surface system, you find the trough, shortwave trough, and you find the shortwave ridge. You go about in the middle, underneath the core of the jet stream, which is about right here, and that's where we're going to expect to find the surface system. So it's going to be located probably around Portland up to north of, I don't know, probably in the Spokane area and back to Billings. Now we have to keep in mind that this is a 17Z or a 12Z chart. So the system will have moved a little bit since then. This, by the way, is a Canadian surface analysis, and I kind of like these charts because they're very old school. And if you want to get to this, there's the link right up here, weather.gc.ca/analysis/index_e.html. Or you can just put in CMC analysis, and that'll take you to this page. And they've got some very neat charts here. For example, you've got snow depth. So if you want to check out what the snow is in centimeters, we got 21 centimeters here, so that's going to be about 10 inches of snow on the ground in northern Saskatchewan. And the southern limit of snow basically runs from New York City to Chicago and back out towards northern Nebraska. So that's one useful chart you don't really find too well on the internet. They've also got a few others like ozone, sea surface temperature, and ice cover. And despite all the stories about melting polar ice, it has pulled together a little bit here in late December, as we would expect. Maybe not as much as normal, of course, because of the warming going on, but you can see that Svalbard here is pretty much ice-free, and all the way to Novaya Zemlya. The Arctic Basin itself, though, still pretty much covered in ice. Temperatures across the U.S. Looked pretty much seasonal, maybe a little bit on the cool side. We had 40 here in North Texas, and I'm showing 48 right now, and teens and single digits up in the northern plains. Let's take a look at a surface chart real quick. There you can see that we have cold temperatures in place. Remember, we had a high across West Texas yesterday. That has shifted east, located over Alabama and Mississippi, and we're starting to pick up this very cool southerly flow. So this is not tropical air. This is recycled polar air coming from Alabama, Mississippi, and ultimately that probably will have come from the Ohio Valley, which means that this is a good pattern for haze here in Texas. I don't know if we have haze in fact, but this is the time the type of pattern where we would expect that to be advecting into the state. The cold front itself is going to be well to the south. In fact, if we go into Mexico, we can see easterly winds coming onto the coast. 60, 65 here around Veracruz, north winds in the Bay of Campeche. So I guess we're looking for the front to be maybe hung up in the mountains here, maybe something like that. I might even go a little bit closer to Monterey, maybe something like that. And we can then trace that all the way up to New Mexico. So all of this is basically a large cold air mass. And as you might guess, when we have southwesterly flow over that, moist southerly flow, we're going to have clouds. And we'll take a look at the Fort Worth sounding right here. This is from, let's see here, about 1 hour ago. And you can see this humid layer right here, where the two lines are very close together. There's your moisture line. Here's your temperature line. So this is showing bases at about 770 millibars. That's going to be about 7,000 to 8,000 feet. And you can see how deep the cloud layers are. They're all the way up to about 20,000 feet. 10,000 feet depth of cloud. No wonder it is so dark outside this evening. Above that, dry air, and below that also dry air. And if we were able to precipitate into that dry layer, we would get a process called wet bulbing, where temperatures at the surface and lower levels, they start falling to their wet bulb temperature, which is going to be kind of in the middle of these two lines like that. So if we rained into this air mass, we would probably see temperatures fall all the way to freezing. And that's one way these cold air masses can generate winter storms. If you have enough upper level lift, enough precip and humidity working the mid-levels, that will get wet bulbing in place, and you'll see temperatures fall down here, and the next thing you know, you have unforecast snow. And that used to happen a lot in the 80s and 90s when the models were not very good with mesoscale processes. A lot of winter storms were missed that way. Okay, take a look at the general upper air pattern. We'll just take a quick look at the forecast and kind of see what the pattern has in store for us. There's that mid-level shortwave, and that's going to work quickly into the Great Lakes area by tomorrow. Another shortwave coming from the northwest in British Columbia. And that kind of shears off and becomes a bit of a closed low here over Portland and Washington. And that'll keep the southern part of the stream kind of hung up in a zonal pattern here in Texas. Very fast flow. So if we have a cold dome in place, that should keep things a little bit cloudy. And just continued northwesterly flow, trending towards zonal later in the period. So not a whole lot of change over the next week. Here's the SPC mesoscale analysis. You can see a little bit of that shower activity there over East Texas around Lufkin, out to Shreveport, Monroe, and Nacogdoches. Let's see, what can we look at? Maybe we'll check out the 700 millibar analysis, because that will be in the cloud. And here you can see the increased moisture, kind of showing the extent of that mid-level cloud right there. Remember that the frontal boundary is way down here, and you can see that we've got a little bit of that isentropic lift. It lifts and condenses, and that forms that cloud material as it crosses over the I-35 in East Texas area. And let's see, one little bonus chart. Let me see, what can I show you? There's not a whole lot of this that's useful in an overrunning situation. These are mostly convective here, so we can look at precipitable water. There's probably some of that going on. And yeah, we've got an inch of precipitable water over Texas. All we would need is a little bit of upper lift to work on this and give us showers But we don't have that. You can see the flow is pretty flat here. Closest shortwave is way out here in New Mexico, and that's not going to get to Texas until Sunday, and it goes mainly to the north. And then we've got this little slug right here over the Gulf of California. That does reach us on Monday, so we're probably going to be looking at a chance of rain here sometime on Monday. All right, I forgot to check on the chat and make sure there's no audio problems. I'm using the new audio board. I've got an Akai MIDI mix that I'm using to push the buttons. That's helping me a little bit. Eddie from Jackson, Tennessee says, first time to join you live. Been watching your videos for a few weeks. Love your analysis and explanations. I appreciate that. And yeah, people getting ready for the New Year's. Eduardo and Sarah, Mike, and Ron and Kevin and Tree. Got the whole gang here. Thanks for joining. I think at this point we can just take a look at the temperature anomaly. So conditions are a little bit cold. Definitely out over the eastern U.S. very cold, and that's helping us support that long wave trough that we've got in that area. So you can see how this kind of corresponds to the upper level patterns, and a little bit of ridging here, or not ridging, but a little bit of warm air over the north and central plains, and that's partly due to some downsloping ahead of that next system coming out of Canada. Very cold conditions in the Great Basin and northwest, and that's helping to support a bit of troughing out in that area too. So now that we have a good handle on the forecast, let's see, do we want to do the GFS? You guys probably don't know this, but I've been bringing in wind grids analyses for like a week now, and I keep forgetting to show these. You probably remember the cross sections we've been doing. Let's do a little bit of that and maybe build a cross section across Texas. And before we do that, we have to actually load the data. Right? It would be a great idea to have some data to look at. So let's load that. And let's see, we're going to go for December 30th. Load in the NAM data. There's our there's our fields coming up. And we're going to display a cross section. So let's do that. Map select. And what I want to do is, you remember that overrunning I was showing you. Let's see if we can sample that a little bit. So I'm going to go from the Gulf of California to Little Rock. And we'll see what comes up. Now, I've not been too impressed by the way WindGrids handles higher terrain, so I don't know how much of this is going to show up, but we can certainly give it a try here. So I'm going to go to the cross-section diagnostics, and I'll bring up my time series. And let's see, what do we have here? What I'm seeing here, I'm not really picking out too much detail in the lower part of the troposphere. I would expect to see a little bit of that cold dome in here, and it's not showing up very well, I think because of interference there with the ground. I think this works out a little bit better with flatter terrain. So I think what we can go ahead and do is look at a more north-south cross-section. So let's do that real quick. I'll go to cross-section and set up the map. And I'm going to go from, let's see, maybe the Gulf of Campeche all the way up to, let's say, Minot, North Dakota. Okay, then we'll do the same cross-section. And this should show up a little bit better here. So to give you an idea of the coordinates, you probably don't know what you're looking at too well. Okay, basically up is increasing height. So we have the surface here. We have 500 millibars right about there. That's 18,000 feet. And above that, we have 39 to 54,000 feet up in this area. Let me see if I can shrink that down a little bit. I know this is probably a little bit hard to read, but I'll try my best here. Okay, so that's the height, and then over here, this is increasing distance to the north. So here's the Gulf of Campeche, here's Texas, here's Oklahoma, Nebraska, and North Dakota. And the big thing that we can see here, we can see the subtropical jet way up here at about 40,000 feet. And we can see the polar front jet a lot deeper. And there's the core right there, 130 knot winds right in this area right here. So that's well to the north, and you can see that's being supported by this very strong front up to the north. This is probably the new Alberta Clipper coming south. And then the front we have down in Texas, that's more what we have here. It's barely reflecting at the surface. And I think that probably makes this a little bit of a polar front jet. So maybe a little bit of a split flow pattern here instead of this being a subtropical jet. So what I'm showing you here, this is kind of the way you can look at a bunch of different products and kind of refine your diagnosis of what's happening in the atmosphere. In fact, as you go north from Texas to Kansas and Nebraska, looks like the cold dome slopes the other way. So if you're going from south to north, you've got a little bit of downslope, a little bit of isentropic subsidence. And the strongest of the cold air looks like that's located right around Dallas and the Red River, right in that area. So let's go forward real quick and look at the forecast and just show you how things kind of evolve. So I'm going to run this forward in 6-hour time steps. Are you ready? Here we go. So now you see things changing, and we see the frontal slope becoming a lot stronger here around Kansas and Nebraska over the next 24 hours or so. So now we're up to, let's see, we're up to Sunday. Yeah, this is the first at 06Z. So Sunday afternoon like this. You can see a little bit of what is probably a subtropical jet over Texas. And then for Monday and Tuesday looking like this. And you see the strongest frontal activity still up in the Central Plains, up in Kansas and Nebraska, right there. So we're going to look for that on the GFS as we go forward in time, focusing right around here on Nebraska and Kansas on Tuesday. And then for, let's see, yeah, Tuesday is the end of the period right there. So looks pretty active in Kansas and Nebraska here. Very strong cold front here and a good polar front jet aloft. And you can see a little bit of that tropopause folding in here. Maybe I can show you the momentum field and you can really see this. I'm going to pull up a momentum chart real quick. Yeah, you see this red line here, that's actually potential temperature or hang on a second, let me get this working here. Okay, yeah, the red is potential vorticity. So this is showing a little bit of tropopause folding right in this area here. And you can also see the tropopause at a lot lower of an elevation over South Dakota. And then you can see how it kind of rises over Kansas and Oklahoma right here up to about 40 to 45,000 feet. So let me draw that out for you. So that's a little bit of that folding going on in this region with the transfer circulations around this jet right in this area here. So a lot going on aloft over Nebraska and Kansas for Monday and Tuesday. So let's go on with the forecast. Let's get our graphics all set up here. Okay, good. We haven't lost anybody. That's good. Tree Nelson says, had 50-mile-an-hour gusts in Thermopolis, Wyoming, 29 Fahrenheit right now. Let's see if we can check that out real quick on the surface chart and see what's going on up there. We'll bring this up to the north. And we can see that new cold front blasting southward through North Dakota. Leading edge is going to be roughly like this, from Minneapolis down through Grand Island, and maybe all the way to Denver, and maybe that recurves a little bit like this. So we can see southwesterly flow. This is kind of like the tropical side of the front, right here in southwestern Wyoming. And north of that, here's the polar front coming southward. A little bit of upslope right here around Scottsbluff. So yeah, a lot going on right there in Wyoming. Very frontogenic in that area right now. So going forward on the GFS, let's bring that up. Fronts are looking like this. Very strong frontal system right there in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And another front. Looks like that is actually probably a little bit further to the north, like this. This is a 3Z chart, so bear that in mind. The fronts have moved a little bit, and they're continuing to move on the way south. So by, let's see, our webcast tomorrow, we're looking like this. Looks like a lot of the frontal activity kind of subsides a little bit, and then we're replaced by high pressure over Idaho. And then we have a frontal system coming through Texas. That's pushed pretty well to the south. Then for our webcast on Sunday, things start to quiet down and we become back under southerly flow in the central plains. And we have our new frontal system redeveloping up there in Wyoming and South Dakota. Kind of like that. So you see that very strong gradient up to the north. That'll be our next system coming down, really pulling it together there on Monday the 2nd. And you remember we saw that on the cross sections. And here that comes southward on its way, kind of like that. Very strong cold air advection, probably. Could be up blizzard conditions again for Fargo, Sioux Falls, Grand Island, or not Grand Island, Grand Forks. And you see that coming through Duluth right there. Very strong winds and very strong cold air advection on the backside. So this is going to hit Iowa and Wisconsin pretty hard. Leading edge of the front here, this is on Tuesday morning, going to be coming into Texas and coming into Nevada and California there. For Wednesday, that front pushes all the way through Texas, and now we're getting that isentropic lift getting started here in Oklahoma and northwest Texas there. GFS going for a little bit of freezing rain and sleet, and then snow in the Oklahoma City area. This is on Wednesday evening. Then for Thursday, a lot of snow here in Oklahoma. Doesn't look like much in the way of accumulation, but pretty persistent. And then by Thursday, for a webcast, very strong cold air advection over Oklahoma and North Texas. There's the front right there, starting to push all the way through Arizona into northwest Mexico right here. So this is going to be a cold pattern for the Great Basin area out in this region right here. Temperatures well below normal. For Friday, cold front pushes all the way through Texas, very strong cold air advection, and the 540 line all the way from Nashville to Little Rock, out through Dallas and out to El Paso. So we're talking about maybe highs in the 30s maybe. Depends on how much air mass modification there is. But it definitely looks cold here. Then we see things moderating a bit on Saturday here as high pressure moves into the Ohio River Valley. We start developing that southerly flow here in Texas. And then let's see, for Sunday and Monday, looks like a new system developing up in the northern plains, but I think this is mostly going to go to the east. Yeah, that's just an Alberta clipper that shifts quickly to the southeast. This is on the 11th on Wednesday. And then it goes for a Central Plains outbreak on Friday next week. Or is that next week? No, this is the 13th. This is for the 13th. So here's that outbreak coming south. Friday the 13th. How about that? And then for Saturday the 14th, it's like just a cold day in Texas, and then we're at the end of the period. And let's just check on the Canadian model, see if it's got anything different. This is the GDPS. This is the Canadian Global model. And we'll run that forward. And I remember on the GFS, they were bringing some maybe light snow kind of in this area. At least it looked light to me. Canadian model seems to be going more for a liquid precip to the south. Actually, this is before the front arrives. Okay, now the front arrives. This is the 4th and 5th. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it's going for a similar pattern snow across the Wichita, Dodge City, Clayton area. And Texas, kind of light precip down there. It also brings the 540 line down to Nashville, Dallas, El Paso. So yeah, it looks pretty cold for next week. And then this seems to be going for more of a Pacific system coming into California on the 9th. Let me check and see what the GFS had for that on the 9th. See if there's a difference. Yeah, there's a huge difference. That looks familiar. Remember, we were looking at the 5th and 6th, how the Canadian model was bringing in a strong system. Okay, this is the GFS here, and then the Canadian, that's the Canadian model bringing stuff into Northern California right there on the 9th. So we'll see what happens with that. Okay, guys, I guess I'm probably getting kind of run down here and talked out, so I appreciate you watching, and I'm glad to have all 15 of you here watching. And we'll see you tomorrow at the usual time. Thanks for joining.